Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Logical positivism is a toxic philosophy which forms the foundation of a Western education. Like my fellow students, I absorbed this philosophy without even learning its name because it's so deeply embedded in the foundations. Time after time, I ran into problems because of the ways of thinking taught by this philosophy conflicted with my intuition and gut feelings. Eventually, after exploring one of these conflicts in depth, I realized that my heart was wrong and that positivism was the wrong way of thinking. But it took me a long time to undo the effects of positivism and to learn to see clearly why it was wrong and also how to think correctly. In this portion, I will try to boil down these life experiences into the simplest possible form. Exploring this topic in full depth would require much more detail. So the questions we mean to explore in this part is, what is this logical positivism? What is wrong with logical positivism? Why does this false philosophy appear to be so plausible? And why does it continue to deeply influence thought and action even though it was rejected by philosophers? I'm going to start with a brief summary of the answers before we go to the details. Logical positivism is a theory of knowledge. It defines what knowledge is and what it is not. And basically, LP says that science is the only source of valid knowledge. Science and science alone can lead us to the truths about the world we live in. This philosophy is obviously false. The most important kind of knowledge teaches us how to live better lives and become better human beings, and this is completely outside the purview of science. The assumption that science leads to truth led to a false picture of science which became deeply embedded in European thought, and this picture has become invalidated only recently with the path-breaking work of Thomas Kuhn on the structure of scientific revolutions. An intuitive theory of knowledge that we all have naturally is that reality is hidden from our eyes and only partially revealed by the observations, the surface. And our logic is also not strong enough to accurately compute all the implications of what we see. So knowledge actually consists of learning about the hidden reality, and the observations only provide hints and clues, and generally we're not smart enough to deduce what is hidden behind the appearances, and so we must ask for help from other sources. In particular, we must use collective wisdom from trustworthy sources which have been gathered over the centuries to help us discover the mysteries of hidden reality. Our Western education teaches us lessons dramatically in conflict with this traditional or intuitive picture of knowledge. First, it teaches that only the knowledge of external reality is valuable and that it only comes from observation and logic, and authority and tradition have no role to play. Furthermore, the most important types of knowledge, what is the meaning of my life, what life is all about, these are not part of knowledge, so we can do whatever we want in this dimension. In particular, economics taught me that everyone pursues selfish pleasure in a competitive jungle, and this automatically leads to the best outcomes for society as a whole. So logical positivism is a radical theory of knowledge which says that science is the only valid source of knowledge. But science offers us no guidance on the central questions we face in our lives. How can we spend these precious few moments on earth? How can we realize our hidden potentials for excellence? What are the goals worth striving for? What is worth living for, and what is worth dying for? Since science has no answers, these questions are considered to be meaningless. This is a deadly philosophical stance. The most important questions we face are not even worth discussing, and they have no answers. To understand the limitations of scientific knowledge, it's useful to understand the distinction between physics and metaphysics. Physics deals with the external reality, what is out there. Metaphysics goes outside the bounds of the observable. Now, this universe, from its origins to its ends, is the absolute limit of the observable. Physics tells us that we cannot have information about events before the creation of the universe. So how the universe was created, who created the universe, this is all metaphysics. It's outside the scope of science, and since science is the only source of knowledge, so there is no possible answer to this. These questions are meaningless. And this basically leads us only with one option, which is to say that the universe was created by random chance events of which we have no knowledge. And this means also that our lives are meaningless. This idea that our lives are meaningless is embedded into the foundations of a modern education. And if we really take this seriously, there are a number of possible responses. One is Existentialism by Sartre, which says that since life is meaningless, we must create meaning in our lives. As opposed to this, Camus offers three responses to this lack of meaning. The first one is suicide. A life without meaning is not worth living. But he says that death is also not with meaning, so this is not a good option. The second option is to surrender, to accept a meaning given from outside, which is God or ideology or religion. So accept an external source of meaning. So he disagrees with this, that as a philosopher this is not acceptable. And finally there's Absurdism, yes, which means that yes, life is without meaning, it's absurd, but we can learn to live with this. If we enjoy the moment, rebel against authority and tradition, we believe in nothing, and we are free to do what we want. For an impact of these ideas on my life, I have given a link here. The problem is not these positions as such, but the problem is that these are adopted or passed on to the student without any explicit discussion or consideration. So we need to think and discuss. This is the most important question we face in our lives, but these are just passed on as the underlayer of the education, and we are taught that lives are meaningless without ever discussing how we can get meaning into our lives. But these larger implications of positivism were hidden from me in my youth, and the meaninglessness of life and the lack of basis for morality are these central implications which I did not consider. But I was baffled by the technical implications. What is probability? Now, my intuition is that coin came up heads, but it could have come up tails. But positivism says that this idea that it could have come up tails is meaningless because this is unobservable. Just like God is unobservable, so the possibility that something else might have happened, this is also unobservable and hence rejected. This makes it impossible. So basically, positivism makes it impossible to define probability correctly. All of the attempts to do so in the early 20th century were based on positivist ideas and therefore rejected the natural definition which says that coin could have come up heads. Instead, they looked at observable implications. And one of the possibilities is that if we keep on flipping coins, then the proportion of heads will converge to half. But this is the outcome of an impossible experiment. And this cannot be made coherent, even though this is the most common definition currently available. There is another alternative which is called subjective probability. This is also incoherent. So all existing definitions of probability are wrong. And this was the thing which puzzled me greatly. Another central idea of statistics is causation, which is essential to how we think and work, but it is unobservable because basically causation has to do with the fact that X occurred and then Y occurred, and if X had not occurred, then Y would not have occurred. Again, this is an unobservable, and there is no way to avoid connecting causality with unobservables. So if you try to reduce causation to observables, then you only end up with correlation, which is not enough. And so again, there is no satisfactory theory of causation within modern statistics, and both of these central concepts lack good definitions because of the deadly philosophy of logical positivism. Much later, I came to some clarity on what's going on. Basically, we have surface appearances and we have underlying reality. The positivist philosophy says that it's impossible to know underlying reality, and that's not observable, so we should focus on the surface appearances. We should only look at correlations and forget about correlations. And also, they think that science is the study of observed patterns and not of the underlying reasons. And basically, positivism tells us to give up on the understanding of the underlying reality, the reason why there are patterns. As opposed to this, a realist philosophy is concerned with the underlying reality. It says that we use surface appearances to deduce the structure of underlying reality. and we learn about unobservable entities like protons and proteins, and we learn about unobservable mechanisms like probability, gravity, causation, electric charge, and this is all learned by looking at the appearances. So basically, it's about knowledge is about the underlying reality, whereas in positivism, knowledge is only of the surface appearances. So the radically different epistemologies, theories of knowledge, is that positivism says that we should look only at observables, forget about unobservables, and realism says that knowledge is only concerned with the unobservables. The observables are surface phenomena, they are trivial and manifest. So statistics is about the numbers which are surface phenomena, and real statistics, which we plan to study in this course, is about the using the surface phenomena to learn about the hidden and unobservable reality. When you think about it, it's almost obvious that positivism is wrong. Knowledge is about the real world, not about appearances. Then why did this false philosophy, obviously false philosophy, become widely accepted? So we've discussed the trauma of loss of faith, that belief in the unseen had proven wrong in Europe. So when Europeans wanted to build a new theory of knowledge, it was taken axiomatic as that knowledge must be certain. It should not be in doubt because it could deceive us again. But the problem is that human knowledge is always fallible, never certain. And so when they said that knowledge must be certain, then basically this led to confining the scope of knowledge to that which you could touch and feel and be sure of. And any extension beyond that, any guesses about the unobservable, were fallible and therefore rejected as part of knowledge. To understand this clearly, it's best to look at a dramatically different alternative, which is the Islamic alternative, and that accepts the fallibility of human knowledge. So the Islamic perspective is that certainty is a condition of our heart, and even this certainty has three levels. It can be achieved by logic, and this is the least and the smallest level. But if we see something, we feel more sure of it, and we experience something, we feel even more sure. But even with this highest level, we have fallibility. We may be 100% sure, we may have experienced something, but this may turn out to be an illusion. And so fallibility is automatically part of the human condition, and we accept this. And we understand that knowledge is not true, and we have various levels of trust or confidence in knowledge. So we can conclude this lecture with the following remarks. After the trauma of loss of faith, European intellectuals sought to build certain knowledge, free from the possibility of error. This quest for certainty led them to reject intuition, heart certainties, and feelings as sources of knowledge, because one cannot be sure about these. But the fact is that there is no certain knowledge. This is not part of human condition. The idea that science leads to certain knowledge led to an extremely distorted philosophy of science, logical positivism, and its predecessors. The social sciences were built on the foundations of this philosophy in the early 20th century, and this has led to a disastrous approach to the social sciences. I have provided a sketch of an alternative approach in a lecture linked here, and there is a sophisticated and foundational set of lectures by Recep Şentürk on decolonizing the social sciences, which lays out in complete depth and detail a very sophisticated approach to the social sciences based on the traditional Islamic intellectual tradition. Highly recommended.